My name is Jessica Moore, and 3 years after my parents told me I wasn't worth investing in, I handed my mother a box of heirloom tomatoes grown from my award-winning greenhouse, the one they said I'd never afford without their help. I watched her smile falter as she read the tag, "Grown by the daughter you abandoned." If you've ever had to earn love that should have been freely given, stay with me, and comment where you're watching from. I want to know how far this story reaches. It happened on a Tuesday. The sun was blinding through the tall windows of our family's living room in Sacramento, and my mom was sipping her usual lemon tea like we were talking about the weather, not gutting my entire future. "You know Emily's apartment closed yesterday," she said casually, tucking a strand of her highlighted hair behind her ear. "Downtown, two-bedroom, just like she wanted. $300,000, great investment." I blinked, trying to catch up. My sister Emily, 2 years younger than me, hadn't held a job for more than 6 months, but she now owned property. My dad, who rarely spoke unless it was about stocks or landscaping, gave a single nod. "It's a competitive market, we had to act fast." "And my college fund?" I asked, even though I already knew. My heart was pounding so hard it made my voice sound distant. Mom didn't even flinch. "That's the thing, there's nothing left." She winced, like the words were uncomfortable in her mouth, but not enough to stop chewing them out. "You're strong, Jess, you'll figure it out." It wasn't a punch, it was the quiet theft of everything I'd planned for. You see, Berkeley had been my dream since I was 12. I had the grades, the volunteer hours, the essays written. But without that fund, it might as well have been the moon. Emily strolled in then, holding a smoothie and wearing a robe like it was Saturday morning. "Hey," she said with a breezy smile, then looked at me. "You okay?" "I'm great," I replied, my voice sharper than I intended. My mother gave me that "don't start" look, which only made me want to scream. Emily glanced between us but didn't ask. She never did. Later that evening, I overheard them laughing in the kitchen, my parents and Emily. They were already planning a little housewarming for her new place. The word "celebrate" floated out into the hall like a slap. I sat in my childhood room that night, staring at the faded UC Berkeley pennant taped above my desk. I used to dream under it. Now it mocked me. My pillow soaked up the tears I didn't want to admit were real. I cried with my mouth covered, like it was shameful to feel this much. Rage twisted in my chest, thick and sour. It wasn't just the money. It was the choice. They chose Emily. Again. I remembered all the late nights I studied while she partied. All the times I cleaned the house while she got praise for folding one basket of laundry. I kept hoping that if I just worked hard enough, they'd see me, but they had seen me. They just decided I could handle disappointment. That night I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling fan, the silence colder than the January air. I knew one thing with a clarity that hollowed me out: I would not beg. If they wouldn't give me a future, I'd build my own. Not to impress them, never again. But to prove that I was always worth it, even when they refused to see. The next morning I was gone before sunrise. The house was still and silent, the kind of silence that always made me feel small. I didn't leave in a storm. I left like a shadow, careful not to wake anyone. I scribbled a note and left it on the kitchen counter, tucked between the edge of the fruit bowl and an unopened bottle of red wine they'd probably been saving for Emily's apartment party. It said, "Don't worry about me. You already taught me how to survive without help. Love, Jess." I had just enough saved from tutoring and weekend shifts at the local nursery to get me a one-way bus ticket and 1 month of rent in a town nobody would think to look for me in Modesto. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. The room I found was the size of a closet and smelled faintly of cinnamon and yeast from the bakery below. The old woman who rented it to me, Mrs. Reyes, told me I could pay her in cash each week. No lease, no questions. As I unpacked my single suitcase onto the creaky twin bed, I whispered to myself, "They gave me nothing, I'll make everything." Every day after that became a quiet war with myself. I'd walk across town to the Modesto Community College Library, a chipped-off campus with more heart than funding. I lived in the biology section, buried under test prep books I couldn't afford to damage and notes scribbled on the backs of receipts. It was the kind of place where the heating barely worked, where I had to rub my hands together before opening a book. But it was also where something unexpected happened, or rather someone. He first noticed me hunched over an open Kaplan prep guide with 6 different highlighters and a half-empty thermos of coffee. I didn't even see him walk by the first time. The second time he stood still, arms crossed, a gentle smirk on his face. "You always study this hard." He asked, voice low, not wanting to disturb anyone else. I glanced up, startled. He was tall, with warm brown eyes and a faded campus hoodie that said, "Go Mustangs." His hair curled slightly at the ends like he hadn't had time to cut it, and his backpack was slung lazily over one shoulder. "Only when I have everything to prove," I replied, a bit sharper than I meant to. He didn't flinch. Instead, he nodded slowly, like that answer made perfect sense. "Alex," he offered, gesturing toward himself. "Jessica," I said, still cautious. He glanced at my notes. "You pre-med?" I laughed, dry and almost bitter. "Trying to be, I'm aiming for Berkeley, biology major." "That's ambitious," he said, but not in the way people usually meant it, not like it was ridiculous. "You good at it?" "I'm desperate," I said, lips twitching. "Sometimes that looks like talent." He tilted his head. "Well, you've highlighted that page like it's a national treasure. That counts for something." I almost smiled. He took the seat across from me the next day without asking, and I let him. Then the next day, and the next. We didn't talk much at first, just studied, side by side, silently flipping pages, exchanging glances whenever someone sneezed too loud or someone's ringtone blared through the stacks. I didn't tell him why I was in Modesto, or that I'd cried myself to sleep the first week. I didn't tell him that I was living above a bakery where the ceiling leaked if it rained too hard. I just focused on ribosomes and plant systems and critical reading drills. But he noticed things. "You don't take breaks," he said once, watching me for a moment, "even when your hands start shaking." "I can't afford to," I said. It came out quieter than I intended. He didn't press. Instead, he offered me half of his granola bar and went back to his flashcards. In a world that had always required me to explain myself, his silence was more generous than any advice. Over the next week, we began comparing notes. I learned he wanted to be a teacher, that his mom was a florist and his dad worked nights at a processing plant, that he'd gotten into the state college but couldn't afford dorms, so he was living with his cousins. We were both trying to outrun where we came from. One afternoon, we were sitting in our usual corner, him cross-legged, me hunched over my third essay draft, when he glanced at me and said, "You've got more fire than anyone I know." I looked up, blinking at him. "What? Fire?" he repeated, tapping the edge of my notebook. "That thing people have when they don't wait for permission." I didn't know what to say. No one had ever called me that before. People called me responsible, focused, cold sometimes, but never fire. I just stared at him, heart thudding against my ribs like it wanted to break through. That night, as I walked back to my room above the bakery, the air smelled like baked sugar and damp pavement. I whispered the word to myself, fire, and smiled. It became a rhythm. Monday through Saturday, like clockwork, I walked the 15 blocks to the library with my old tote bag slung over my shoulder, filled with half-used notebooks, scavenged pens, and my beat-up biology prep book with coffee stains on the cover. And almost every time, Alex would be there. Sometimes he'd arrive first. Sometimes I would. But somehow we always ended up in the same dusty corner with the crooked lamp and the lopsided table. We never said we'd meet there. We just did. At first, we talked about safe things. Science mostly. We debated which biology professor had the most incomprehensible test questions. We argued about photosynthesis cycles like it was a national debate. Once, we spent 20 minutes comparing our terrible cafeteria experiences from different campuses. But over time, the silences between pages turned into something else. Comfortable, personal. One rainy afternoon, the library was emptier than usual. The windows fogged, and the fluorescent lights flickered overhead. I was fidgeting with the corner of my essay draft, trying to think of a better metaphor for resilience in my personal statement. Alex glanced over at me, chewing on the end of his pen. "You always get this tense when you write about yourself." I hesitated. "Yeah, it's hard to make something sound inspiring when it still kind of hurts." He didn't ask what hurt, but his expression shifted, softer, attentive. "Want to read it out loud?" I looked at him, startled. "Seriously?" "Yeah, I won't say anything, just listen." So I did. I read the first paragraph, voice low, stumbling through the parts where I felt exposed. About how I'd grown up believing that success meant being useful. About my dream of becoming a biologist and the summer I spent teaching myself genetic sequences because my high school didn't offer AP Bio. About how I'd learned to persist, even without cheerleaders on the sidelines. When I finished, there was a long silence. Then Alex said, "That's not just good, that's real, it's got teeth." I exhaled, not realizing I'd been holding my breath. You think so? He nodded. You're not trying to impress, you're just telling the truth. That takes guts. I bit my lip to keep the warmth from flooding my face. He leaned forward, tapping his pen on my notes. You've got more fire than anyone I know. He'd said it before, but this time it landed differently, deeper. I looked at him. Why do you say that? He tilted his head. Because you show up every day. You grind harder than anyone, even when it's unfair. You don't complain, you just work. Most people fold. You keep building, I swallowed. It's not fire, Alex, it's fear. If I stop, I disappear. He didn't flinch. Sometimes those are the same thing. That was the moment I told him. Not everything, but enough. About how my parents used my college fund for my sister's apartment. How I found out in our living room while Emily was planning color palettes and I was still dreaming about Berkeley dorm sheets. How I left home the next morning and moved into a rented room above a bakery with no heat, no help, and no plan. Alex didn't interrupt once. No pity, no judgment, just silence that felt like an open door. I'm not trying to prove them wrong, I added. I'm trying to prove I existed, that I mattered, even if they didn't think so. He looked at me with something like understanding. Then he pulled his essay draft from his folder and slid it across the table. I grew up thinking I'd work in my dad's factory, he said. That I'd do it until my back gave out and that'd be the end of it. But one day in ninth grade, my biology teacher made us grow bean plants. And mine thrived, I mean weirdly thrived. And for the first time I thought, what if I don't have to stay stuck? I smiled softly. And now I want to teach science. So some other kid sees something thrive and wonders the same thing. We sat in the quiet for a long time after that, essays between us, pens abandoned. That day, the library felt less like a place to study and more like shelter. A secret world we'd built together, quietly, steadily, without needing to name it. When I finally stood to leave, Alex said, "Same time tomorrow," and I said, "Always." By early spring, I'd memorized the rhythm of test prep like it was a second language. Wake up, walk, library, study, review, repeat. Alex and I pushed each other in ways neither of us had ever experienced before. He made flashcards for the sections I hated, organic chemistry, statistics. I proofread his essays and poked holes in his logic until he laughed and begged for mercy. Our routine was so steady, so focused, that sometimes I let myself imagine it wouldn't end. And for the first time in years, I was hopeful. I'd mailed off my application to UC Berkeley 2 weeks early, tracking every requirement like it was a lifeline. My personal essay was stronger than I thought it could be, raw but determined. Alex said it read like someone who had already made it, even if no one had given her the title yet. I believe in you. He'd told me that night we dropped the envelope in the blue box by the gas station. I nodded but didn't let myself believe it yet. I'd been told too many times not to get my hopes up. But deep down I wanted it. Not for revenge, not even for recognition. I just wanted one corner of the world to say, yes, you belong here. The morning results were supposed to drop. I woke up early, before the bakery ovens started rumbling underneath my floorboards. I stared at the ceiling in the dim gray light, my heart beating in double time. By 8:00 a.m., I was already at the college library, logged into the Berkeley portal. The page took forever to load, and when it finally did, my name wasn't there. No congratulations. No welcome letter, no digital confetti, just the cold indifference of absence. I checked 3 more times, refreshed, closed the tab, opened it again. Still nothing. My stomach dropped like I'd missed a stair. For a moment, the world around me blurred. The edges of the screen, the quiet buzz of the library, the sound of someone's pencil tapping 2 rows over, it all went distant. It felt like falling backward into a hole I thought I'd climbed out of. I packed up my things in a daze and walked out into the wind. There was a cafe around the corner where Alex and I sometimes met when we wanted a change of scene. A small place with chipped mugs, too many plants, and a waitress who never rushed us to order. Was already there, somehow always early, sitting at our usual window table with 2 cups of coffee and a paper bag beside him. He looked up and saw everything in my face. I didn't speak, just shook my head once as I sat down. For a long moment he didn't say anything, just slid one of the coffees toward me and let me sit with it. My hands trembled slightly when I took a sip. Then, wordlessly, he reached into the bag and pulled out a stack of used textbooks. Biology, chemistry, lab workbooks, Annotated, underlined, well-loved. Found these at the used shop near campus, he said casually. A little beat up, but the content's solid. I blinked, confused. Alex, I didn't get in. I know. Then why? He cut me off with a look so steady it almost hurt. If college won't take you, he said, tapping the top textbook, we'll make our own classroom. I stared at him, speechless. You didn't fail, he continued. You just got rerouted. It sucks, yeah. But if the goal is still learning, still biology, still making something with this brain of yours, nothing's stopping you. Tears stung behind my eyes. I looked down at the books, the faded covers, the cracked spines. I feel like such a fool, I whispered. Like I built my entire world around one letter in one envelope. You built your world around belief, he corrected gently. That's not foolish. That's brave. We sat like that for a while, me blinking back tears, him quietly stacking the books by subject. Then he added, so, what do you want to study first? And just like that, something inside me clicked back into place. I wasn't done. The rejection didn't erase the knowledge I'd gained. It didn't undo the nights I spent underlining chapters until my eyes blurred. It didn't steal the fire Alex had named in me. Maybe Berkeley didn't want me, but I still wanted me. So I picked up the chemistry book. Let's start here, I still suck at covalent bonds. Alex grinned, already pulling out a pencil. Then we'll crush covalent bonds. That afternoon, we created a study schedule, not because we had exams to pass, but because we had futures to shape. We weren't students in the official sense, but we were something better, builders, dreamers, people who refused to sit quietly while doors closed. And maybe that kind of education couldn't be measured in degrees. But it was real, it was ours. I didn't expect the job at the organic food store to teach me anything. It started as a survival move, a way to pay rent without collapsing under a third-shift dishwashing gig. Mrs. Reyes knew someone who knew someone, and 2 days later, I was ringing up kale and kombucha for customers in yoga pants with motivational stickers on their water bottles. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. The name tag said Jess, and somehow that made me feel like a person again. I stacked apples. I memorized where everything was. I learned to smile even when people got annoyed over expired oat milk. But what surprised me most was how much time I spent talking about plants. Like real conversations. A woman with silver-streaked hair once asked about starting an herb garden in the shade. I told her basil hates the cold but mint will grow anywhere, like a weed with ambition. Another man came in asking about compost. I explained carbon-to-nitrogen ratios using a banana and a tea bag display. He came back the next week with photos of his tomato sprouts and a goofy grin. Word spread. Soon I had regulars. People started calling me the girl who knows things about plants. My manager even let me tack a little note onto the community board. Free gardening tips from Jess, ask at register. I didn't realize how much I missed feeling useful until that. Meanwhile, Alex kept showing up like clockwork. Never needy, never loud, just there. After my shifts, he'd meet me at the back of the store where the deliveries came in, holding 2 cups of tea and a backpack full of books. This week's lesson, he'd announce, flipping through his notes, is photosynthesis, because I heard someone say it's like plants eating light, and that made me want to scream. I'd laugh, sit on an upturned crate, and let him teach me. It wasn't just content, it was care. He'd rewrite lab summaries in my learning style. He'd pause to ask, you tired, or can we do one more example? Sometimes we didn't study at all, we just sat there, passing a bag of pretzels back and forth, talking about nothing and everything. One night, it rained hard, the kind that made the whole world smell like pavement and pine. We sat in the alley behind the store, our backs against the brick wall, books closed, just listening to the downpour. I used to think success meant leaving everything behind, I said quietly. Like proving I didn't need any of it. Alex glanced at me, and now I think, maybe it's about building something new, not just for revenge, but because it matters. He nodded, slow and thoughtful. Then, in a voice so soft I almost missed it, he said, it feels like we're building something, doesn't it? I turned to him. Yeah, I breathed, it really does. And in that stillness I felt something shift. Not like a grand epiphany, but more like a door quietly opening. I wasn't just recovering anymore. I was creating, from leftover textbooks, from compost and seedlings. From a life I was growing by hand, day by day. We didn't have degrees yet, or titles, or certainty, but we had each other. And we had a beginning. It started with a single pot of arugula on the windowsill above the bakery. The leaves were scraggly, stubborn, and not at all photogenic, but I watched them sprout like they were sacred. I'd saved clippings from spoiled produce at the store, basil stems, wilted lettuce, half-rotted cherry tomatoes, and coaxed them back to life in cracked mugs and salvaged yogurt containers. It was slow, messy work. I ruined 3 batches of soil before I learned how to balance pH. I stayed up reading plant cycle studies until my eyes burned. Mrs. Ray's let me dig up a corner behind the bakery, and a neighbor offered a raised bed he didn't use anymore. Bit by bit, I stitched together a patchwork of borrowed soil and repurposed hope. I named it Jessica's Greens, even though there were barely 5 trays of spinach and herbs to my name. The name wasn't for others, it was for me. Proof that something was mine, that I could grow something from scratch and dare to call it real. Alex helped me build a simple online page, nothing fancy, just a few pictures, a contact form, and a list of available produce updated weekly. Most of the time I barely broke even. Some weeks I lost money altogether, especially when I tried to deliver orders by bus during heat waves and half the lettuce wilted on arrival. Still, I kept going, because giving up wasn't an option. Not anymore. I sold bundles of parsley to a tiny cafe 2 blocks down. The barista called it peppermint for the soul and told me I should start pressing herbs into oils. I started labeling paper bags with hand-drawn stickers, sun, leaf, and flame. Sometimes I caught myself whispering, "They gave me nothing, I'm making everything," like a charm against exhaustion. But some nights I doubted, hard, like the time 2 trays of seedlings molded over, or when a high-end deli refused to pay, saying I wasn't a verified grower, or when the rent went up and I had to choose between soil nutrients and bus fare. That week, I barely slept. I snapped at customers. I almost emailed the cafe to say I was quitting. Then, out of the blue, Alex said, "Come to dinner Friday. My parents want to meet you." I hesitated. I didn't want to explain what it felt like to build a future out of compost and dollar store seeds. But Friday came, and I found myself standing in front of a small yellow house with chipping paint and warm light spilling through the windows. Alex opened the door before I knocked. Inside, his mom had flour on her cheek and a roast in the oven. His dad wore an apron that said "hot stuff coming through." "Jess," his mom exclaimed, pulling me into a hug that smelled like rosemary and home. "Alex tells us you're feeding half of Modesto out of a sidewalk garden. That's incredible." I laughed nervously. "It's more like a quarter sidewalk, and 3 confused mint plants." At dinner, they asked real questions. What did I grow? How did I sell? What was my long-term plan? I admitted I wasn't sure, that I barely made it work some days, that I didn't even have a proper greenhouse or any formal education. But I spoke honestly, and they listened like what I said mattered. After dessert, Alex's dad leaned forward and said, "You've got vision, Jess. You're not just growing food, you're growing an idea, and we believe in people like you." I looked at him startled. "Why? Because it's rare," his mom added softly, "to meet someone who builds from scraps and doesn't wait for permission." Something in me cracked open. I'd been waiting for someone to say that my dream wasn't just a fantasy stitched together from rejection and pride, that it was something real, valuable. That night, walking back to the bakery with a tin of leftovers in my bag, I looked up at the moon and whispered, "Okay, we keep going." Because maybe failure wasn't the end. Maybe it was just compost. Moving in wasn't planned. Like most of what happened between Alex and me, it unfolded slowly, then all at once. At first, it was just a toothbrush left behind. Then a second mug in the sink, a folded hoodie of mine draped over the arm of his couch. Soon I was falling asleep on his floor beside flashcards, and waking up to the smell of scrambled eggs and his hand gently brushing hair off my forehead. "You could just stay," he murmured one night while we were lying on his threadbare couch, my head on his chest, his thumb tracing quiet circles along my arm. I didn't answer right away. The thought of sharing space, real space, not borrowed shelves and shared benches, terrified me. I'd spent so long depending only on myself that letting someone witness me unguarded felt risky. But I looked around the apartment. Plants in every corner, our books stacked side by side, and the whiteboard above his desk where he'd once written in green marker, "Jess Crush's bio exam, duh." And I realized, I already lived there. I just hadn't called it home yet, so I stayed. It wasn't glamorous. Our kitchen was barely big enough for 2 people to stand in, and the faucet groaned every time we did dishes, but it was ours. He'd quiz me while I packed seed kits. I'd read to him from his teaching textbooks while he cooked. We laughed. We studied. We planned. Most nights, I fell asleep with dirt still under my nails and his heartbeat steady in my ear. One night, while the city hummed outside our open window, I turned to him and whispered, "I've never had this kind of peace before." He kissed the top of my head. "You built it." And maybe I had, piece by jagged piece. The next morning something shifted. It happened after a quiet cup of coffee and a walk through the community garden I'd helped restore last month. I saw a flyer posted on the garden gate, greenhouse space available, sliding scale rent, small plots for beginner growers. I tore it down without hesitation. By noon, I was standing in front of an aging glass greenhouse nestled behind a local high school. It smelled of dust and potential. The old man who ran the place offered me a discounted monthly rate for someone who looks like they care more about roots than receipts. Within a week, I was hauling pots and soil across town. I'd saved every extra dollar from herb bundles and backyard starter kits. And though I barely had enough to cover the first 2 months, I signed the agreement with shaking hands. Jessica's Greens had been a name on a sticker before. Now it was real. The greenhouse wasn't much, some cracked windows, uneven floor tiles, and vents that whined when it got too hot, but it was mine. The first time I stood alone among the rows of seed trays and sun-warmed earth, I cried. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because, for the first time since I left Sacramento, I felt rooted. I sent the first official order form to the cafe that had believed in me from day one, then another to a small market downtown. I posted a photo of the greenhouse on my page with a caption that simply read, "We've grown." Within hours, I had 4 new inquiries. Back at home, I found Alex sitting at the kitchen table with takeout and a proud smile. He handed me a tiny envelope. Inside was a homemade business card, "Jessica's Greens grown from grit, rooted in hope." I looked up tearful. "You made this?" he shrugged. "I just printed what you already are." That night, as I watered the basil and packed bundles for delivery, I whispered to myself, "They gave me nothing, I'm building everything." The heat came like a warning no one took seriously. It started with a day of still air, heavy and dry, as if the whole city was holding its breath. Then temperatures climbed past 100, the sun beating down with no wind, no clouds, no mercy. At first, I thought I'd be fine. The greenhouse had shaded panels, and I watered early in the morning and again at dusk. I'd survived worse, barely affording groceries, hauling soil on foot, even rejection letters that nearly broke me. I could survive this too. But within 4 days, I watched the leaves I'd nurtured for months curl in on themselves like tiny fists closing. My arugula scorched. My basil went bitter. The spinach, my bestseller, withered before my eyes, yellowing even as I whispered to it like it could hear me. I tried everything, ice buckets, reflective panels, makeshift misters, but nothing could fight the relentless sun. It felt personal, like the universe was reminding me, "You don't get to win this easily." Orders were delayed, then canceled. The cafe emailed politely to say the last few bundles arrived wilted. The downtown market posted a vague but pointed review, "Inconsistent quality, promising but unreliable." And just like that, the little momentum I'd built began to slip. One morning, I walked into the greenhouse to find half my seedlings collapsed, the soil cracked and bone-dry despite the watering. I sank down beside the trays, dirt on my knees, arms limp at my sides. I stared at the rows of ruined greens and whispered, "I don't know if I can do this anymore." That night, I didn't speak much. Alex noticed. "Talk to me," he said gently as we ate in silence. "It's not just a bad week," I murmured. "It's everything. No capital, no equipment, no backup. I built this from scraps and now it's falling apart," and my voice cracked. "I can't keep pushing a dream that might not work." He didn't try to fix it. He just listened, his hand resting over mine. The next afternoon, while I sat at the kitchen table researching how to file for business closure, I heard a knock. When I opened the door, Alex stood there with 2 box fans in his arms. Behind him, his parents were unloading plastic bins, extension cords, old curtains, spray bottles, anything that might help. His dad wiped his brow and said, "All right, where do we set up the emergency cooling station?" I blinked, stunned. "What are you doing?" Alex looked at me like it was obvious. "Saving what we can. But this won't fix the heat." "No," his mom said, setting down a crate of cloths soaked in cool water, "but it might buy you time. We're not letting your garden go down without a fight." his dad added, already hauling supplies toward the greenhouse. I followed them outside, wordless, my throat tight. Together, we hung damp cloths over the greenhouse panels. We plugged in the fans and set up buckets of ice to circulate cooler air. We sprayed the leaves gently, talking to them like worried parents. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even professional, but it was something. That night, I sat on the floor of the greenhouse, surrounded by makeshift solutions and the soft whir of borrowed fans. The heat still pressed in, but it no longer felt like it was crushing me. Alex brought me a thermos of tea and sat beside me. I saw you almost quit today, he said softly. I did, but you didn't. I looked at him, at the sweat on his brow, at the hands that had lifted and carried and held. You showed up, I whispered. He smiled. So did you. I didn't know what the next week would bring. The crops might still fail, the orders might stop coming, the reviews might stay up. But for the first time since the sun began its cruel siege, I didn't feel alone in the fire. And that was enough to keep trying. The first green shoot that came back after the heatwave wasn't even one I'd planted on purpose. It was cilantro. Somehow it had survived in the shade of a broken shelving unit, its leaves still bright, still breathing. I crouched beside it and laughed, honestly laughed, for the first time in weeks. That was the moment I stopped chasing perfection. Instead, I leaned into what I already knew, what I could share, teach, and build even when the soil failed me. Alex was the one who suggested the workshops. You talk about this stuff better than any textbook, he said one evening as we packed salvaged seed trays into boxes. What if instead of just selling greens, you showed people how to grow their own? I hesitated. Would anyone even care what I have to say? He raised an eyebrow. You're the only person I know who revived a garden out of cracked mugs and rainwater. If that's not worth teaching, I don't know what is. So I printed a few flyers, growing from scratch, intro to container gardening, no yard. No problem. Learn how to grow fresh produce in any space. Instructor, Jessica, yes, of Jessica's Greens. I taped them up on library boards, in the window of the cafe, and at the store where I'd once rung up kale and quietly answered composting questions. I figured I'd get 2 people, maybe 3. 10 showed up. One woman said she saw my stickered delivery bags and had been waiting for me to teach a class like this. A dad brought his daughter, who wanted to grow strawberries in recycled yogurt cups. That first Saturday, we planted arugula in takeout containers and talked about failure like it was just another season. The week after, I launched a small starter kit line. Just enough seeds, soil pellets, instructions, and encouragement to give someone else what I'd once needed. Orders started trickling in, then doubling. By fall, I was running monthly workshops out of the greenhouse. Local bloggers wrote about the girl who built a farm on borrowed dirt. A community college reached out, asking if I'd consider guest lecturing. Then the invite came in my inbox, Modesto Green Futures. Local innovators panel. We'd love to feature Jessica Moore of Jessica's Greens as a speaker on grassroots entrepreneurship and sustainability. I stared at the email for a long time, not believing it was real. Me, a speaker. The event was held in the rec hall of a converted train station, lined with repurposed wood and dangling string lights. Room buzzed with small business owners, eco-designers, student volunteers. I stood behind a podium in my best only blazer and told them the truth. That I'd started with nothing. That the rejection I thought would ruin me actually rerouted me towards something better. That growth wasn't always visible right away, but that didn't mean it wasn't happening. I expected polite applause, but what I got was a standing ovation. After the seminar, we went out to dinner, me, Alex, and his parents. Nothing fancy, just a small booth at a diner with chipped counters and the best sourdough in the county, the kind of place that didn't rush you to leave. Alex's mom reached across the table, her fingers brushing mine. We're so proud of you, she said softly. We always knew you had it in you. That's when the tears came. I didn't, I whispered. Not until you believed it first. They let me cry. No one rushed to fill the silence. I wiped my cheeks with a napkin and added, voice cracking, you made me believe I could be more than just overlooked. Alex leaned close, resting his hand over mine. You were never overlooked, you were underestimated, and those are different things. And in that small, flickering moment between grilled cheese and hot tea, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was blooming. It was a Wednesday morning, just like any other. I'd been up early, sorting seed kits and prepping soil blends for the weekend workshop. The kettle was whistling. My phone buzzed. A new order came in from someone named Lena in Fresno. Normal, easy, and then I felt it. Not a symptom exactly, just a pause. A shift in my body I couldn't name but couldn't ignore. Like my center of gravity had quietly changed without my permission. By noon, I was in the pharmacy aisle, gripping a test in one hand and a bottle of ginger tea in the other, heart pounding like I'd just run a race barefoot. I didn't wait to get home. I ducked into the bathroom at the corner cafe, locked the stall, and sat on the edge of the seat staring down at a piece of plastic that was about to rearrange everything. Minutes later, I saw the result. 2 pink lines. Clear. Unmistakable. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared at the test while the world outside kept moving. Orders called out, milk steamed, spoons clinked. My legs didn't move until the moment my heart did. Tell him. I ran. Literally ran across town, the test still wrapped in a paper napkin, wind tangling my hair and my breath catching in my throat. Alex was volunteering at the community center that morning, helping set up a science corner for kids. I burst through the doors like a storm. He looked up, surprised. Jess. I could barely breathe. I need to tell you something. He stepped forward, brows knitting with concern. What happened? I didn't say it. I just handed him the napkin, trembling. He unwrapped it slowly, and when his eyes landed on those 2 soft pink lines, he froze, a heartbeat, then another. And then he smiled, not a small smile. A full, disbelieving, joyful grin that lit up every corner of the room. You're we're. I nodded, and just like that, he swept me into his arms and lifted me off the ground, laughing into my neck. I hadn't realized how scared I was until I saw the joy in his eyes. I thought maybe he'd hesitate. Worry, ask if I was ready. I wasn't even sure I was ready, but he didn't say any of that. He just whispered into my ear, warm and cert. Then let's make this official, let's be a family. We didn't tell anyone else that day. Instead, we walked home holding hands, slower than usual, as if the air had changed and we were still learning how to breathe in it. 2 weeks later, we were married in the backyard of his parents' house. Just the 4 of us, a borrowed trellis strung with fairy lights and the scent of rosemary and old roses in the wind. His mom cried the moment I said, I do. His dad brought out homemade lemonade and toasted to the fiercest woman I know. We didn't wear white. We wore what we had. I carried a bouquet of clipped herbs from the greenhouse, basil, thyme, and marigold. Simple, honest, perfect. With their help, we found a house just outside of town, a sunlit fixer-upper with a wraparound porch and a backyard that sloped into open soil. The minute I saw it, I imagined rows of tomatoes, sunflowers standing tall, our child toddling between squash vines in the fall. It wasn't just a home. It was a beginning inside a beginning. We stood together in the middle of that overgrown garden, Alex's hand on my belly, the sunset painting gold across the fence posts, and I whispered, this is everything I never thought I'd have. He kissed my forehead and murmured, you built all of it, Jess, every single inch. And maybe I did, not out of luck, not out of someone else's favor, but out of quiet, stubborn, undeniable love for the earth, for him, for the life we were about to grow together. It had been a peaceful Sunday, almost suspiciously so. I was planting early lettuce starters near the porch while Alex cleaned the gutters. The sun was gentle, the kind of warmth that rested on your skin instead of burning through it. Even the air seemed to hum with quiet contentment. I didn't hear the car until it pulled into the gravel drive behind our house. A sleek, silver thing with tinted windows and tires that barely crunched. At first, I thought it was a lost delivery driver. Then the door opened and Emily stepped out. Same glossy hair, same delicate heels that didn't belong near soil. She stood still for a moment, eyes darting from the porch swing to the flower boxes to the trellises hung with climbing beans and hand-painted signs. Jess, she called out cautiously. I stood, brushing dirt from my hands. Emily, she blinked. Is this your place? It is. She stepped closer, heels wobbling slightly in the grass. Her eyes scanned the whitewashed trim, the greenhouse in the back, the rows of raised beds bursting with life. Wow, she whispered then. Dad, you have to see this right now, into her phone, not even turning away as she spoke. I didn't move. I didn't invite her in. 15 minutes later, their car came. Same one I remembered from Sacramento, spotless and smug. My parents stepped out slowly. My mother wore linen like it was armor. My father looked older, more fragile than I remembered, a bit of gray softening his temples. They walked the path without speaking. When my father reached the porch, he stopped cold, staring not at the house but at me, at my rounded belly, at the way Alex emerged from the side gate, gloved hands resting protectively on my shoulder. His eyes welled, and for the first time in my life I saw him look small. "We were wrong, Jess," he said quietly. "We thought you'd never make it without us." My mother looked away. Emily fidgeted with her phone. I looked at them, all of them, the family who once called me strong as a way of abandoning me, who'd measured my worth against convenience, and I reached for Alex's hand. "I did," I said, voice steady, "because I had people who chose me." The words didn't shake. I didn't cry. I just stood there, rooted in the truth I'd built with my own hands. My father opened his mouth like he might say more, but the silence between us had finally become something I no longer needed to fill. So I turned back toward the porch, where seedlings waited and the kettle was starting to whistle inside. Some doors, I realized, don't have to be slammed. They just don't need to be opened again. They started showing up on Sundays. At first it was awkward, too quiet, like everyone was afraid to say the wrong thing. My mom would bring a pie in a glass dish she expected to get back, and my dad would offer to fix things that didn't need fixing. A loose board on the porch, a squeaky hinge on the greenhouse door, busy hands for guilty hearts. I didn't make it easy for them. I didn't smile wide or ask them to stay long. But I let them sit on the porch. I let them hold the baby, our daughter, Lily, wrapped in soft green blankets, her tiny fingers curled like she was already planting seeds in the world. They looked at her like she was something sacred, and I watched them with a wall between us that I'd built, brick by careful brick, out of every time they told me I'd figure it out while giving Emily the map. One Sunday, after Lily had fallen asleep in her grandfather's arms, my mother and I sat at the table by the window. I was sipping cold coffee, sorting workshop materials for the week. She didn't speak for a while, just watched Lily's chest rise and fall in rhythm with my father's breathing. Then she said quietly, "I used to think the strong ones didn't need anything." I didn't look up. I thought if we gave more to Emily it was balancing things out, because you always seemed unbreakable. I finally met her gaze. She looked older, softer in the light. There was no makeup today, no silver earrings, just a woman with years she couldn't take back. "I see now," she continued, "your strength wasn't the reason to abandon you. It should have been the reason to support you." I didn't reply. Because what do you say to someone who only recognized your worth after you stopped needing their validation? Instead, I stood and placed a small pot of lavender in front of her, something I'd grown from a cutting Alex's mom gave me the first week we moved in. "You can take this home," I said simply, "but don't forget to water it." She smiled faintly, tears brimming. "I won't." And that was it. No grand apology, no sweeping reconciliation, just space. Space to let them try, without expectation. Space to let Lily know where she came from, without forgetting how far we'd come. I didn't forgive them easily. I wasn't sure I ever fully would, but I listened. Because sometimes healing doesn't come with dramatic scenes or perfectly timed regrets. Sometimes it's just a quiet afternoon, a passed-down pie dish, and a tiny heartbeat reminding you that you broke the cycle by blooming right through it. The fields stretch wide now, wider than I ever thought they could. Rows of sunflowers wave like golden flags toward the sky. Kale, chard, tomatoes, and lavender bloom in neat, thriving sections. There's a new greenhouse now, bigger than my first, built with solar panels and community donations. And at the edge of the property, near the orchard, a small wooden sign reads, "Jessica's Greens Grown from Grit. Shared in Hope." Every fall, we host the Harvest Festival. What started as a thank you potluck has turned into something bigger. Food stands, workshops, music, and rows of kids learning how to plant marigolds in biodegradable cups. And every year we announce new scholarship recipients, students who, like I once was, were told they weren't quite enough. It's the part that always gets me. Watching those kids step forward, eyes wide, shoulders squared, knowing I'm handing them not just opportunity but belief. Alex helps me read out the names, always grinning like it's the best part of his year. It probably is. He still teaches full-time now, and half the kids in his classes show up at the festival wearing shirts that say "Plant the Change." Emily comes, too. She brings her twins, rowdy, curious little boys who treat the pumpkin patch like a racetrack. She teaches at a public school across town, and when she talks about her students, there's a light in her voice I never saw in the girl who once called me intense for studying too much. Our parents volunteer at the welcome booth. My mom bakes pies from my own apples now, and my dad walks the perimeter early in the morning to check for frost like it's his sacred duty. We don't talk much about the past anymore. Not because it didn't happen, but because the present finally grew too full to leave much room for resentment. That doesn't mean I've forgotten, or that every scar healed clean. Some hurts settle into the soil and stay there. But walking through the fields with my daughter Lily, now 8 and full of questions, I feel something stronger than bitterness. I feel peace. She skips beside me, one hand in mine, the other brushing across rosemary bushes. Mom, did you really grow all this from like scratch? She asks, brow furrowed like she's trying to do the math. I smile. From less than scratch, from no one believed I could. She nods, satisfied. Well, I believe you could. And just like that, it feels like everything that was once broken is blooming in front of me. We stop at the hill overlooking the farm, and I crouch beside her, brushing dirt off her knees. The sun is low. The light is soft. I can hear music and laughter below, friends, neighbors, strangers, now family. And I think, sometimes justice doesn't roar. It grows. That was the end of my story. I still wonder sometimes, when Emily showed up uninvited and brought our parents to see the life I built, was she trying to reconnect or reclaim a piece of something she once overlooked? Did she do the right thing? Let me know in the comments. And if my story meant something to you, please like the video and subscribe. I'd love to share more of this journey with you.